It really hits you hard when you see the numbers, something like 1 in 4 people having experienced sexual assault as children.
Yeah.
And we tend to think of trauma as these huge, catastrophic events.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really eye-opening, and what we're digging into today, is how even seemingly ordinary events can have this profound, lasting impact.
That's the crucial shift in understanding we're aiming for, really. We're taking a deep dive into Peter A. Levine's healing trauma to explore exactly this, these often debilitating effects of experiences our bodies register as overwhelming, not just the big headline stuff.
Right, and this isn't just theory. This deep dive, it's tailored for you, the listener, and based on Levine's decades of work. He's got a PhD in medical biophysics and psychology.
Yeah, and he developed somatic experiencing, which is this body-centered approach to healing trauma. We'll touch on the principles today.
Over 35 years in the field, so quite the perspective.
Definitely. So our goal today is basically to unpack what trauma truly is, beyond the common understanding. We want to look at how it imprints itself on our physical being and, importantly, highlight that powerful innate capacity we all have for healing. That's a real cornerstone of Levine's work.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The word trauma just gets thrown around so much these days, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Someone has a traumatic commute, you hear that.
Yeah.
Levine is pretty clear that's not quite the level he's talking about. So what's his core definition?
Well, for Levine, trauma refers to the often debilitating symptoms that arise after our system has been overwhelmed by an experience that's perceived as life-threatening or overwhelmingly stressful.
Perceived. That's the key word.
That's the key word, exactly. A stressful day is one thing. An event that triggers our deepest survival mechanisms. That's something else entirely.
And it's so personal, isn't it? What one person's system perceives as overwhelming, well, another might barely register it.
Absolutely. Levine really stresses the highly individual nature of trauma. Our genetics, any history of previous difficult experiences, even, our family dynamics, they all influence how we respond. And understanding this helps us move away from sort of judging ourselves or others
Right.
and towards a more compassionate view.
It really challenges that narrow image we have of trauma, just war veterans or survivors of severe abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But Levine points to some surprisingly common triggering events, things many of us might not immediately connect with long-term effects, like car accidents,
Yeah.
even minor ones.
Yeah, even fender benders, routine medical or dental procedures.
Really?
Oh, yes. The loss of someone we love, natural disasters. He even includes something seemingly small, like a child falling off a bicycle.
Falling off a bike. Wow.
The potential for trauma in these events isn't about the objective severity necessarily. It's more about whether our inherent ability to respond to that perceived threat gets overloaded.
That feeling of helplessness.
That feeling of utter helplessness in the face of danger. Yes, that's a core component of being traumatized.
And it's not just the immediate threat, is it?
Yeah.
Levine describes trauma as kind of loss of connection to ourselves, to our bodies, family, the world. And he says this can happen bit by bit, almost without us noticing.
That gradual erosion,
Yeah.
it's one of the insidious aspects of trauma. We might just feel a general sense of unease or disconnection, maybe not knowing why.
Yeah.
And this can lead us to unconsciously restrict our lives, maybe avoid certain feelings or situations, and ultimately just diminish our overall vitality.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? One of the really hopeful aspects of Levine's work is his emphasis on our innate capacity to triumph over trauma.
Yes, that's vital.
He even sees the healing process as potentially being a catalyst for profound awakening.
That's a vital perspective. Levine doesn't see trauma as like an incurable condition. He sees it as something our bodies are fundamentally designed to heal from.
Okay.
He even draws a connection to spiritual traditions, that view suffering as doorway to awakening. It sort of echoes Buddhist ideas.
The Four Noble Truths.
Exactly. Suffering is part of life, but there's a path towards transformation. Levine's approach, you could see it as offering one such potential path.
So we've got a better sense of what trauma is. Now let's talk more about the causes. You mentioned that the perception of life threat is key.
Mm-hmm.
Levine really underscores this, saying trauma is trauma no matter what caused it.
Exactly. Whether the root cause is something obvious like war or severe abuse, or something less obvious like, say, a minor car accident that results in whiplash,
Right.
or even a routine medical intervention. The body's hardwired response to that perceived threat is what truly matters. And it's often those less obvious events that, warrant closer consideration in our own lives.
He lists so many of these less obvious potential causes, things we might easily dismiss.
Mm.
Minor car accidents, you mentioned whiplash.
Yep.
Invasive medical or dental procedures. He specifically mentions ether, the anesthetic,
Oh, interesting.
and suggests even pelvic exams can, for some, feel like an attack. Then there are falls, natural disasters, illnesses with high fevers, being left alone as a very young child.
Mhm.
Prolonged immobilization, extreme heat or cold for babies, sudden loud noises, even birth stress for both mother and baby. It's a surprisingly broad range.
It really is. And he encourages listeners, you, to really check in with your felt sense as you hear this list.
That felt sense, what does he mean by that exactly?
It's our ability to tune into the subtle sensations and signals within our bodies, that internal landscape. He's inviting us to become more aware of how our bodies react, even if our conscious minds don't fully register something as traumatic at the time.
Got it. So when we perceive a threat, our body gears up, generates energy for defense, fight, or flight.
Right.
And Levine says if this energy isn't fully used or discharged, it becomes key to understanding the symptoms that can appear later.
Precisely. Our bodies are designed to mobilize for action. If that action gets blocked, maybe we're overwhelmed, that mobilized energy can become trapped or frozen in our system.
Frozen energy.
Yeah, and that can then manifest in a whole spectrum of symptoms.
And these symptoms, they don't necessarily appear in a neat, predictable order, do they? Levine outlines a kind of general sequence, starting with immediate reactions.
Yes. Right after an overwhelming event, you might experience hyperarousal, that racing heart, sweating, racing thoughts, being super alert. There's often a physical constriction, a tightening up as we focus on the threat, and then there's dissociation and denial.
Right, that mental distancing. He quotes Woody Allen.
Yeah, I don't want to be there when I die.
Yeah.
It's like that protective pulling away from overwhelm. And then feelings of helplessness, immobility, even literally freezing up can happen right away.
Then come the sort of early symptoms shortly after the event.
Right. These include things like hypervigilance, being constantly on alert.
Looking over your shoulder.
Exactly. Intrusive images or flashbacks, extreme sensitivity to sounds or lights, hyperactivity, nightmares, sudden mood swings, shame, lack of self-worth, just a lowered tolerance for stress in general, and trouble sleeping. It's quite a cluster.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, these early symptoms can stick around or even morph into later symptoms, sometimes years down the line.
Years later.
Yeah, things like panic attacks, general anxiety, specific phobias, maybe periods of mental blankness, difficulty concentrating, avoidance behaviors, steering clear of places or situations that remind you of the event, sometimes even a paradoxical attraction to danger.
That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it happens. Also, addictive behaviors as coping mechanisms, changes in sexual activity, amnesia around the event, difficulty forming deep connections, feeling love, a persistent fear of dying, self-harm, and losing faith in your beliefs about the world.
And then he describes this final group, symptoms that can take even longer to develop.
Things like excessive shyness, a noticeable kind of flattening of emotional responses, difficulty committing in relationships or work, chronic fatigue that rest doesn't fix, problems with immune and endocrine systems like thyroid issues, sensitivities, various psychosomatic illnesses, headaches, digestive problems like spastic colon, chronic pain like fibromyalgia, asthma, skin disorders, severe PMS.
It's a huge list.
It is. Feelings of depression or impending doom, a sense of detachment or alienation, like feeling numb or not real, like you're watching life from a distance, and even a reduced ability to plan for the future.
Gosh, it's sobering, isn't it? Just how far-reaching the impact can be, and often interconnected.
Absolutely. And Levine emphasizes these symptoms can be stable, they can fluctuate wildly, or they can stay hidden for a while. They often appear in these interconnected groups that get more complex over time.
Making it hard to trace back.
Exactly, making it challenging to link them back to the original experience.
Now, this compulsion to repeat that Levine talks about, that's particularly striking, this unconscious drive to reenact parts of the original trauma.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this can play out. It can be pretty direct, like someone with a history of childhood abuse finding themselves in similar abusive relationships as an adult. But it can also be much more subtle, showing up in our choices at work, in seemingly random accidents, or even as recurring physical symptoms.
Like kids reenacting things in play.
Exactly. Children often do that, reenacting frightening experiences in their play as a way to try and process them.
He mentions Bessel van der Kolk's work here, too, and shares that really powerful story of the Vietnam veteran.
Oh, the one who staged robberies.
Yeah, every year on the anniversary of his friend's death. The
Hmm.
specific date, the time, using his fingers like a gun.
Hmm.
It all pointed back to that traumatic firefight and the just unprocessed grief. It really shows how these seemingly irrational behaviors can be driven by this deep unresolved wound.
It really does. If you think about it, his actions, while seeming inexplicable from the outside, were this powerful, though unconscious attempt to find some kind of resolution.
Trying to process it.
By recreating elements of that devastating event, he was trying, somehow, to process the overwhelming emotions his system couldn't handle at the time. And his healing involved finally understanding that connection and allowing himself to grieve.
And then Levine connects this to how seemingly random accidents can also be a form of reenactment. Recurring sprained ankles, persistent whiplash.
Yeah, even certain psychosomatic conditions. The key, he says, is often the repetitive nature, the similarity of these events, often in situations where you're not clearly at fault.
It raises the question, like, why? Why this unconscious drive to repeat painful things?
It's as if the unresolved trauma is seeking completion, like the body and mind are trying to finally process what was initially too much. These accidents could be seen as unconscious attempts to revisit the feeling, hoping for a different outcome maybe, or a sense of mastery.
And that story of Jack and the boating accidents.
Oh yeah, that one really highlights the hidden connection.
The proud display, then falling hard on his back, getting the wind knocked out of him, literally and emotionally. And then naming his own boat, the same name as his father's, the high seas. It's like these echoes across time, patterns we might not even consciously recognize.
It's insightful, isn't it? How seemingly separate events can be deeply interwoven through this underlying emotional landscape of trauma. Jack's boating incident wasn't just bad luck.
No.
It was a replaying of that earlier childhood fall, that moment where his pride was shattered. And naming the boat suggests an unconscious attempt to reclaim that earlier experience, maybe find a different resolution.
And then there's avoidance, which seems like the opposite side of the coin, right?
Exactly.
Like avoiding ladders after a childhood fall, maybe not even knowing why.
Exactly. Both reenactment and avoidance are ways unresolved trauma shapes our behavior, often operating outside our conscious awareness. One is an unconscious pull towards things that echo the trauma.
And the other's a push away.
The other is an equally unconscious push away from anything that might trigger similar feelings.
But Levine ends this section on a note of hope, doesn't he? Reframing these symptoms as internal wake-up calls. Even suggesting we might be grateful that our body is sending you messages that healing needs to happen.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective. Instead of seeing symptoms as signs of weakness or illness,
Right.
Levine encourages us to see them as the body's innate intelligence communicating that something needs attention, needs healing. It's about learning to listen to these messages, not just suppress them.
Okay, so we have a clearer picture of what trauma is, the causes, the symptoms. Now let's delve into how Levine says trauma actually affects the body. He starts with animals, which is interesting.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is Levine's observation that prey animals in the wild, they face life-threatening situations constantly, right?
All the time.
But they rarely seem to show the long-term trauma effects we see in humans. He points out that the instinctive survival parts of our brains are very similar to theirs. And animals seem to have this innate capacity to effectively process and, well, shake off the effects of these encounters.
Yeah, shake it off.
Yeah.
He mentioned seeing this in wildlife documentaries and how it clicked with his client Nancy's shaking.
Yes, the trembling in her therapy session. And he draws parallels to shamanic healing rituals, too. And then there's that incredibly vivid example, the polar bear video.
The National Geographic Polar Bear Alert one. Tell us about that.
It's so compelling because it just shows this biological process happening. You've got this huge bear, obviously in shock after being chased and tranquilized.
Right.
And what follows is this intense trembling, almost convulsive shaking, these deep, rhythmic breaths. The narrator even says the bear is blowing off stress.
Blowing off stress.
And if you watch it slowed down, the leg movements, they aren't random. They're like incomplete running motions. It's as if the bear is completing the escape that got interrupted. It's just this visceral display of the body releasing that trapped survival energy.
Wow. It really drives home the point that healing trauma is fundamentally biological. It's bodily.
Yeah.
Even though the psychological effects are huge.
Absolutely.
And that reconnecting with our physical sensations is vital.
If we connect this back to that frozen energy and the symptoms, what we see in the polar bear, that shaking, that trembling, that is the mechanism for releasing the trapped energy.
The natural way.
It underscores Levine's core belief. Trauma starts as a physiological event that then impacts mind, emotions, spirit. So addressing it at the bodily level is a primary path to healing.
And this brings us to fight, flight, and freeze. We know fight and flight, but the freeze response seems really key to understanding the long-term effects.
Right. Fight and flight are about mobilizing energy, confront, or escape. Levine uses the example of a mother lifting a car to save her child.
Incredible strengths.
An extraordinary discharge of energy signaling safety. But if that full discharge doesn't happen, say the child is trapped, the mother can't lift the car. The body stays stuck in that high-energy stressed state.
Okay, and then he uses the Serengeti analogy. Cheetah and impala.
Yes. To explain the freeze response, the impala, when caught, often goes limp, looks like surrender, but its nervous system is still highly activated. He calls it the immobility response.
Immobility response.
And what's critical here is that it's also a survival strategy. For the impala, maybe it deters the predator or numbs it to pain.
Right.
But the key difference with humans is that we often struggle to spontaneously come out of that frozen state. Those numbed out feelings that helped us survive can then prevent us from reorienting and getting back to equilibrium.
So being able to return to balance after immobility is key to avoiding being traumatized.
Precisely.
And the animal shaking and trembling is their natural way to do that. Discharge the energy, return to normal.
Exactly. Andrew Bonalli's observation about captured animals needing to tremble and breathe deeply before release.
To survive.
To ensure their survival, yeah. If they don't release that frozen energy, they're less likely to make it. Now, humans rarely die physically from unresolved trauma, but Levine stresses our lives can be severely diminished, a kind of living death where our full potential isn't realized.
But the good news, the encouraging part, is that we humans also have this innate capacity to shake off threat. It's just maybe sometimes, with our complex brains, we need a bit of guidance to reconnect with it.
That's the heart of Levine's hopeful message. This inherent capacity for self-healing is within all of us. His clinical work consistently shows this. Trauma starts in the body.
So healing needs to address the body.
Healing needs to address the physiological level first. That paves the way for the mind, emotions, and spirit to fully recover.
Now, moving out of that immobility, that frozen state, it sounds like it could be quite intense. Levine mentions humans can get frightened by that released energy.
Yeah, and instinctively brace against it.
Which ironically stops the very discharge that's needed.
That bracing against the intensity is a significant hurdle. That undischarged survival energy stays stored in the nervous system, contributing to all those symptoms we talked about.
Right.
So Levine's 12-phase healing trauma program, it's designed specifically as a gentle, gradual way to help people safely release this frozen energy.
Gentle and gradual, moving from fixity to flow.
Exactly, moving from that state of fixity and bracing back into a state of natural flow and resilience.
And that gentle approach seems so important, given how sensitive trauma can be.
Absolutely. By slowly, safely discharging that residual survival energy, people start to feel less threatened, less overwhelmed, less frozen. This movement from fixity to flow brings more coherence, body and mind, fosters reconnection, inner peace. And crucially, Levine emphasizes you don't necessarily need to consciously remember the specific details of the event to heal.
You need the full memory.
No, because trauma memories are often stored as these fragmented sensory and bodily experiences, body memory.
Body memory. So by gently accessing these through that felt sense we mentioned.
Exactly. Through the felt sense, we can begin to discharge that trapped survival energy. And he notes this discharge can be quite dramatic sometimes, or surprisingly subtle.
Like what?
Well, it could be a noticeable full body tremor, or maybe just a subtle shift in body temperature, a wave or emotion passing through, a deep breath. The body finds ways to release that held energy.
And the potential for change is significant.
Oh, profound transformation. Chronic pain can subside, new capacities and strengths emerge, relationships deepen. You might find a renewed sense of passion, vitality. As Levine puts it so well, when trauma is healed, shift happens.
Shift happens. I like that. He's clear, though. This isn't meant to replace traditional therapy.
No, not at all. It can be a powerful complementary tool. He even encourages people to share the book with their therapists.
And it sounds like there's a real emphasis on self-help potential, too. That individuals, families, friends can use these ideas.
That's a key takeaway, definitely. While professional support can be invaluable, Levine's work also empowers individuals to take an active role in their own healing and to support others by understanding the body's inherent wisdom and its remarkable capacity for recovery.
So as we bring this deep dive into Peter Levine's healing trauma towards a close, What are the key insights you'd want our listener, you, to take away?
Um, I think the most important points are probably these. Trauma is far more widespread and comes from a much broader range of experiences than we typically think.
Right. Not just the big T traumas.
Exactly. It has a profound impact on the body by trapping that survival energy that didn't get fully discharged. However, and this is crucial, we all possess an innate ability to heal.
How?
By understanding this process and gently facilitating the release of that frozen energy, mainly through a deeper connection with our bodily sensations, that felt sense.
That's a really powerful summary. And it leads me to this final thought for you, our listener. Now that you have this deeper understanding of the body's role in trauma, I wonder, what frozen areas in your own life might be sort of yearning for a shakeoff to maybe unlock new possibilities, a greater sense of well-being?
That's a great question for reflection. And this understanding can be a catalyst. Levine's book goes deeper into sexual trauma specifically, and also the connection between spirituality and trauma as paths to awakening. He also includes a really valuable section on trauma, first aid, practical guidance for adults and children right after a potentially traumatic event.
To know.
And for anyone interested in learning more about somatic experiencing or finding practitioners, the website is www.traumahealing.com.
Excellent. It truly is a rich and insightful book, and we really hope this deep dive has given you a valuable overview of its core ideas. Remember, as Peter Levine himself reminds us, trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence.
Absolutely. There is always hope, always a path towards healing, and ultimately a more fulfilling life.